Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast, brought to you by Kalajian Guitars. Founded in 2014, Kalajian Guitars strives to bring modern aesthetics and options to vintage-inspired designs. Go to KalajianGuitars.com for more info. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Fishman, Inspired Performance Technology. Fishman is dedicated to helping musicians of all styles achieve the truest sound possible, wherever and whenever they plug in. Go to Fishman.com for more info. And now your hosts, Joey Sturgis, Joel Lasek, and EYAL Levy.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Joey Sturgis Forum podcast. Welcome back. It is Mastering Month, and we have a special guest with us, Mike Kalajian. And if you're not familiar with Mike, his first word actually was speaker, which is really cool. Nice to know that. And well, first of all, let me just say, you've done like the new Saosin record for mastering. That's pretty cool. Against the Current, Moving Mountains. And I think I have a couple of other ones in here. But first, let me just say, I find this really cool. You and a friend built your first basement studio in junior high, and you started charging student musicians like $20 a song with a cassette 4-track.
Oh yeah, we did it, to record ourselves. We actually started before that, just with this little 4-track, and we wrote terrible songs and wanted to record them. So we started doing that, and we would show our friends who were other musicians in school, and they'd be like, "Oh, you gotta do this for us." And we were like, "Okay, how about $20 a song?" It was like the Austin Powers thing, $1 million. And they were like, sure. So, we would just have them down to this basement. It was just, a couple rooms that we built in his unfinished basement. And we had no idea what we were doing. But that was like our first enterprising venture into recording.
Man, that's amazing. That's actually how I got started as well. I kind of leave that little part of my story out often, but I recorded joke songs for all my friends on my 4-track, and they would, when they'd come over for a sleepover, we'd make the stupid songs.
What 4-track did you guys have? Because the one that I had like a Tascam mini disc one. It was like $1,800 back in the day, and I could never record more than 1:30 of a song before the thing would crash, and I'd have to try to piece it together.
We had a Tascam. It was a cassette 4-track, and then we had this friend who had the 8-track version of it, and we had him in our band just because he had the 8-track instead of the 4-track.
That was a big deal back then.
Yeah, it was a big deal. And then we got Sony made a mini disc 8-track. And that was our big step up that we got, because it was digital and it sounded awesome. But I don't remember having any huge issues with it, but I know it didn't sound, it kind of was very MP3 sounding all the time, no matter what you did.
I had the Tascam one.
And they were super, data compressed. But I mean, it was funny because we had no clue. I mean, we had, no access to really any sort of education about it. So I remember when we bought a book on recording and realized that we should put a kick drum microphone inside the kick drum for rock music, and it was our minds just blew. It was oh my God, that's how you do that? Holy crap. We were doing stuff like plugging distortion pedals right into the mixer and lots of trial and error stuff, but it was fun.
I've actually done that as well. I've plugged the distortion pedal directly into the 4-track, cassette tape 4-track, and just...
That's amazing.
And then been why does the guitar sound hairy?
Garbage. Yeah, let me EQ it a little bit. Okay, I guess that's cool.
Hey, I remember in 8th grade when I really first started playing guitar and getting into music, when I was listening to, I think it was a Green Day song, and I couldn't figure out how the guitar could solo over a guitar riff. I'm like, man, he's playing 2 parts at once.
Yeah,
really
how do they do that? Yeah, there's only one guitar player in the band. I'm trying to think. There was this one, this band, No Use for a Name, and they came out with this album, More Betterness. I'm trying to think of what year that was. Maybe I could look it up here real quick. No Use for a Name, More Betterness, 99. Okay, so that was one of the albums that came out, and we were like, we need to figure out how to do this. at all costs. And I go back and I listen to it, and I still love that record, but it doesn't sound nearly as good as I remember it sounding back in the day.
Well, one thing that I think is cool about your start and similar to our start is I think this puts you in a position to have sort of a unique perspective on audio as you go throughout your career. And I'm just wondering, how do you think that's played into your strengths and what makes you creative when you work with people?
Well, I think that even more than, starting like that was, for years, really until like 2 years ago, I was producing and mixing and, I've edited and quantized more drum tracks than I could possibly count, you know what I mean? And done reamping and everything. So like I appreciate it, and not to say that other mastering engineers don't, but when somebody sends me something to master, it's like I can imagine I know how much work it was, and I get it for like an afternoon, and that's serious, I don't want to mess it up. And I have to really respect the amount of work and the amount of effort that went into it. And I can hear it too, which I think is pretty cool. I'll listen to stuff and I'll be like, wow, I appreciate how good this guy's drums sound or this guy's guitar sound because I spent 15 years trying to make my drums sound like this, and also I feel like I can kind of hear the direction that they want. You know what I mean? I can put myself in their space and almost envision how they want it to wind up. And use that as kind of a jumping off point.
Yeah. Now, taking the amount of work that went into it into consideration, I feel like is so important for a mastering engineer because really you are the final coat of paint, so to speak, or the final
absolutely.
spice on the top of the food that just really makes it pop. And I'd want a younger generation of audio professionals coming up now to really respect that process and to not get so caught up in the, what plugin do I put on my, on my master out and how do I set it? Like, take it a little bit more seriously. It is an art. I think it's a delicate art, and it takes a lot of finesse to get it right. And I just want to say, are you in the box or out of the box when you master?
I am mostly out of the box with analog gear, but I definitely use a combination.
Okay.
There are plugins that do things that I could never do with the hardware, and then there's hardware that just has a little bit of something extra that plugins for me don't have. Certain ones.
I'm with you on that.
So to a generation of people who are coming up pretty much in the box exclusively, what could you say to them to really convince them about this, I guess, this magic that analog can impart on a mastering project?
Well, I think if you have a really great mastering engineer work on your stuff, if you do a mix and then, you do your own master, or you have somebody master it in the box, they can definitely do a great job. But if you send it to somebody who's also excellent and they have analog gear and they do something that really takes advantage of what that analog gear can do for your music, you'll hear it. I was in the box forever just because I really couldn't afford stuff. I mean, mostly when I was recording, but over time I would get a piece of gear and I would listen to it and I would compare it back and forth. And I never took for granted that this is analog gear, so it must be better. I was always really critical. Does this EQ, even though I spent $4,000 on it, does it sound better than my favorite plugin EQ? And the answer wasn't always yes, but sometimes the answer is holy shit, yes.
I think it's very important to be inquisitive about products, really, and even processes. Like, even if someone can show you an example of a great process or a great product, like, look how this makes something sound. Isn't that so much better? That's awesome and everything, but I still think that one of the most important fundamental elements of being in this industry is just being like, inquisitive and curious and willing to take that ability to like experiment and take that to an extremely important place. I feel like a lot of guys get too comfortable.
Absolutely. I mean, I try to spend, if I have a little bit of downtime, which isn't as frequent as it used to be, especially, I have kids now and everything, but if I have a day that's not booked, I'm here and I'm going to pull up a mix and I'm going to EQ it with 4 different EQs. 2 are plugins and 2 are regular EQs, and say, which really sounds better if I forget what I'm using, or what, with limiting and clipping and driving different pieces of equipment, do 10 different versions of a verse and a chorus of a song and really listen. And I think that experimentation is huge for any, aspect of recording, whether it's mixing or tracking or mastering, just trying different things and really being critical of it, and not just saying, well, this is an analog EQ, so it sounds better, or this is a plugin, so it's going to be more precise. Just try everything and then forget your pretenses and listen, you know?
Yeah, that's great.
I think that's where a lot of uniqueness comes in when it comes into like developing a style, because ultimately, as you get good at this, whatever you do, mixing, producing, mastering, you're going to have a sound.
Sure, yeah.
And people are going to seek you out for that sound. But the problem is, it takes a while to develop that sound. And it's those experiments and just sitting down and trying something and plugging something in that may not seem right, or just not being afraid to experiment. And because sometimes you make mistakes, and it's those mistakes that all of a sudden make your eyes pop out and you go, holy shit, then it becomes a habit. And once it becomes a habit, it imparts itself into
and I think that also, I'll see what gear guys are using, guys whose work I really respect, and then I'll try that gear, and it's like, well, this doesn't work for me at all. I don't know why, for whatever reason. And that's been a big thing with the analog gear, swapping out different pieces, figuring out what really works for me and my sound. I hope to get to the point where it's like, okay, I'm done, for a while. This is my chain. I really like it. I have options for kind of whatever gets thrown at me. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting there.
It's a never ending. The gear lust is.
Yeah, it is never ending. I hope it slows down a little bit though.
Yeah, I hear you. I've been taking some time off buying gear myself, and every time I sit down and see a catalog, I just right back into it, and I'm like, oh, I want to buy this and this and this and add this and this and that. And
yeah, they keep coming out with all this cool new stuff. It's hard to resist.
Man.
A Barefoot Sound, the monitoring company, they just came out with an add-on for their big speaker. It's like a mastering tower. I think it's almost $50,000, but it's plus or minus 1 dB flat from 18 hertz to 40K. 1 dB, I think it is. It's crazy.
That's ridiculous.
It's very crazy.
I kind of want to hear it.
No, yeah, it's the same thing. It's like, I want to hear what this sounds like. What can I sell? Can I sell like a kidney or something to get this? And it's like, no, you know what? It's fine. I'm fine. I don't need this. I have to like slap myself every now and then.
So we have a lot of people here that really just can't afford a mastering engineer, and not, that they're not necessarily working on things that would have a budget for that. Maybe they're just doing some stuff for themselves as well. We have some guys who write their own music and record it themselves. Some of the stuff that we talk about in terms of like how to master your own music oftentimes requires, at least $1,000 or more of plugins or gear or something. Do you have any tips for quick ways and effective ways for those kind of guys to really get the job done, and have it, not completely demolish their work?
Well, are these guys mostly mastering their own stuff, or are they taking on other jobs?
I feel like a majority of them are working on their own work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if that's the case, then the best thing that they can do is just work on their mixing. You know what I mean? The more, it's like a give or take. The better they get at that, the less they're going to have to really worry about the mastering end. I get mixes from people, and it's not all the time, but you always hear the story about the mastering engineer getting the mix where it's like, okay, I'm just going to turn it up a little bit, and I'm going to trim the top and tail, and then I'm going to, send it back, and then it's done. So there is potential to mix it so well that you really don't need to fix any problems, and then you can kind of just give it a little bit of level, and you're good. If I were working on my own stuff, and when I did master my own projects, my mastering chain usually consisted of like a 2-bus compressor and then, whatever limiter I was going to use. And then anything else I heard, I would go back to the mix and correct it there. But I think that aside from that, the biggest bang for the buck thing that people can do, probably the thing I see neglected the most, is monitoring and your room. That was the big deal for me. Getting all the analog gear was nice, but when I really started to pay attention to what my space was like and the speakers that I had and the reflections in my room and all that stuff, then it just became really clear what I had to do to make something sound better. And the tool that I used was kind of just the icing on the cake, So
Mike, if you were going to give a person who's starting out, say they want to improve their room or, get a better listening environment, maybe not spend any more money, what would you recommend that they do? Where do they start with? Where do they get their bang of the buck?
To tag on to that, I know that all these things are important, absorption, diffusion, etc. But what do you think is probably the most important to a typical space?
Geez, if I had to make an educated guess, which is really all I can do, I'm not too much of an acoustician, but I think that it's probably the low end in spaces. I think that spaces are just generally too reflective. I know that when I was, starting out building my space and kind of, or my previous space and getting it better. One of the things I did is I went to Lowe's and I just bought, they have this insulation, and it's made from like recycled blue jeans. It's not fiberglass or anything, so it was pretty safe. And I just built these boxes, just big bass traps. And it was super inexpensive. I mean, I think for like $100, I built like 5 or 6 of them, and I kind of like put them in different positions around my room. I don't know if you guys familiar with the whole mirror trick for finding first reflection points?
I know about it, but I would love for you to describe this to our users.
Sure. So basically what it is if you set your speakers up, and I guess initially you should try to get as much symmetry as you can in your listening space. So if the sound it's gonna bounce off the walls, the floor, and the ceiling above you. So if you kind of look at the wall to your left and you look at the wall to your right, and there's a wall immediately on your right, and then on the left is a hallway that goes down 40 feet, you're going to have this reflection off the right wall into your ear, and then you're not going to get it so much, or it's going to be much later from the left-hand side. And that's going to kind of throw your stereo image off. And then also your brain does this kind of thing where if a sound, you guys know about the Haas effect, where it's like if a sound is less than it's like 15 milliseconds or something like that, you don't really perceive it as a delay. It's kind of just your brain combines these sounds, and if certain things are out of phase because of the timing with reflections, you'll actually get changes in the frequency response that you're hearing because of it. So getting symmetry is a way to even that out a little bit. The other thing with the mirror is if you're sitting in your listening position and you have your speakers in front of you and you have a friend hold a mirror against the walls around your room, anywhere that you can look into that mirror and see one of your speakers is a spot that the speaker is going to reflect off into your ear. So that's kind of your primary location that you want to put absorption. There's usually 2 kind of if you just point to the, stretch your arms out directly to the side, and then there's usually 2 a little bit behind that, and then there's 1 above you, which is why a lot of people have clouds.
Yeah, and a lot of people ignore that space, and I think that space is very important. I've heard the difference between clouds before.
Sure, yeah. In my space now, if I took the cloud out, it would completely throw everything off. I mean, I would have no idea what I was hearing.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about speakers. And I know, this is probably one of the biggest areas where these guys just don't have good stuff. And I talk to a lot of people. We're always in the forums and in the chat rooms and stuff, and people are like, where can I get a good set of speakers for $400? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think you can. But let's just assume, we've got a decent budget. Well, where's a good starting point?
Well, what do you specifically, what would you say budget wise? Like $1,000, $5,000, $500?
Let's say between $1,000 and $5,000.
Okay. Actually, that's pretty cool because that's roughly what I wound up spending on my speakers. Before this, I had, studio monitors, and I had Genelecs, which I really liked. I had Dynaudios, which I actually didn't love. And then I wound up with these speakers called Event Opals, which were pretty wild speakers, and they sounded really, really good for a small speaker. I think that they were about $3,500 for a pair, and they just sounded huge for a near field. But when I switched over to mastering, I bought B&W Nautilus 802s, and I got them for just about $5,000 used, in excellent condition. And granted, they're like a 15-year-old speaker, but to me, they sound awesome. They're so much more pronounced in the mid-range. They're a 3-way, which was most studio monitors are 2-way. And hearing that 3-way kind of dedicated mid-range was also kind of an epiphany to me. It was like, wow, that's where everything is. That's where the vocal is. That's where piano is. That's where guitar is. And now I've got this speaker dedicated to it. When you listen to a solo guitar, it almost feels like that's the guitar speaker, that's the speaker of the amp right in your room. It's super interesting.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it is cool. So I would definitely, if somebody really wants to get into mastering, I would look into the used market for sure and try to get something that's, pretty full range. But I think that, for someone who's mastering their own mixes or someone who's kind of doing it more on a personal level, you can definitely get away with having studio monitors. I mean, I did it for a long time. I think that the real thing is, getting the room dialed right so you're hearing, what you're supposed to hear out of them.
Absolutely. So Speaking a little bit back onto your career and how you work, just curious, because we have some questions to follow this up. How many masters do you actually do per year?
I think last year it was over 350 projects. I don't know the exact breakdown, but if I had to guess, it would probably be about 100 or 150 records, and then a handful of EPs, and then heaps of singles.
Wow, so that's up there in the song count. The song count's up there.
Oh yeah, it's a crazy thing, and I think, and this was actually 2015 was my first year as like just a mastering engineer, and I think fortunately I made enough connections and made friends with enough people during the 10 years of recording and playing music that I was able to just kind of call a bunch of people and say, hey, I'm doing mastering now, send me some stuff for test masters, and was able to get the work coming in that way.
That is I want to highlight that because that is a good way to win over customers. I've done that. I've been like, hey, I'll master one song for free, and if you like it, you can hire me for the whole album.
Sure. I think it's huge. I mean, it's something that I could never really, you can do it with mixing, but it's a pretty big commitment time-wise. And then obviously with production, it's an even bigger commitment. But with mastering, you can get a song done in 45 minutes. So if you like the artist and you believe in your, ability, then why not?
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, here's a kind of a fun one. So how many masters do you think it's possible to do in a single day?
I've done 29 songs in a day. That's the most that I've ever done.
I think the important thing here too with this question is how many do you think you can handle before your judgment starts to get cloudy?
Sure. So the reason why I was able to do the 29, aside from I absolutely had to, that was the main reason, but it was like 2 albums, an EP, and then like I think it was maybe it was 3 albums, and 2 of the albums were incredibly consistent, which is so nice. I mean, when you get an album and it's just done, and I think one of them was done by an engineer who I know very well, and I know that his mixes are just like painstakingly consistent from one song to the next. So it was nice. I kind of mastered the first song, and then I would just listen to the next song, make sure it was cool, print it, next song, So if that hadn't been the case, and if I had to, let's say I got singles and every song was completely different, I don't think I could do maybe more than 10 in a day before I was shot.
Yeah, I found like it depends on the genre in some cases, because I feel like in some of the metal records, the approach to the tones and the mix is a little bit more static than dynamic.
Sure.
And that can carry over into the mastering as well. It doesn't really require a lot of unique tweaks from song to song. But I look at your discography and I see a whole world of music that's nothing like that. So I imagine that you do have to put quite a bit of time into each one. And I think that's something that the audience might not quite understand, because they often work on the heavier style of music, and so there's this whole world of actual dynamics in music, and believe it or not. So this leads me to the next question. What's one thing you would change about mastering trends today, aside from the whole loudness war?
What would I change about it beside the whole loudness thing? I would.
Do you feel like a lot of stuff is going too bright? Are we doing weird things with the low end? Like what's a common trend you hear in mastering that just really pisses you off?
Let's see. That's a really good question. One thing that pisses me off, and this is maybe not the answer that you're looking for, is that Lander, that's one. And
oh my gosh, yeah.
And speaking of which, I think that they said that whether or not they did a study, I can't say, but they said that like 95% of music that's released is like unmastered. And I guess that's if you take into account like everybody on SoundCloud and all these, kind of peer-to-peer platforms. I would change that. I would educate people about good mastering. But I would also, if there's one thing that I would change, and it's not so much about the mixes I get, but I would make it a little bit more clear what the standards are for the different distribution mediums. Like I listened to, you guys had Bob Katz on, who's a brilliant guy, and he was talking about the levels on YouTube and the levels on iTunes and Spotify and how they're a little bit different on YouTube from the rest of them. That's something that I really feel like could be ironed out and also just made more clear. There's no real solid information about what's what. And, like with Spotify, there is a, loudness normalization thing, and it's on by default. In iTunes, I don't think it's on by default, but it's on the iTunes radio, and it's, you know what I mean? It's kind of hard to tell exactly what audience you're playing for when you're mastering, and that's something that I wish was a little bit more cohesive.
Well, here's my issue with it. I believe that the mastering engineer is starting to lose control of his work because it's getting represented in so many different ways. Now, you work with someone like, I would imagine if you work with Bob Katz, you're going to get, maybe 10 different versions of your record back. You're going to get one that's intended for YouTube normalization, one that's intended for Spotify normalization, et cetera, something that's friendly with soundcheck, something that's mastered specifically for iTunes.
Sure.
The issue, though, is that is not an easy or simple process yet, especially for, I'm not a full-time mastering engineer. I do master a lot. I master my own work and I master other projects that aren't my productions. And I'm still unclear on how to really go through that process. But then you talk to someone like Bob Katz and he does a separate MP3 master just because he can have control over the bends and stuff like that, which is insane.
Sure, yeah. And I do a certain degree of that stuff. I mean, I'll do it, mastered for iTunes and a vinyl pre-master. And I think with like you were saying with Spotify and YouTube, you have to really read up and know what their standard is to kind of be able to be master for it effectively. But then it gets kind of scary because with Spotify, so you have this loudness normalization. I think it's -16 LUFS. And if you master for a rock record that low, I mean, it's quiet. So what happens if somebody has the normalization turned off? Because you can. Then you're kind of sunk. Your record is like 8 dB lower than everybody else's. So you want to take that gamble? I mean, I feel like it should either be on or off so you know exactly what you're going for. And then even so, actually just yesterday, the band Let Live that Dan Corneff worked with posted a video of their song, and I was listening to it and I was like, wow, this sounds incredible. It was mastered by Ted Jensen. And I went and I listened to some songs of Dan's that I had mastered that were videos up on YouTube, and they were like, 4 dB or 5 dB quieter. And I was like, well, I don't think that my master was that much quieter. So then I went and listened to the wave files, and in fact, they weren't. And it turns out, or my most educated guess is that it has something to do with how the video is handled, or the audio is handled when it's put into the video to be put up on YouTube.
Yeah, I just had something mastered by Ted about 2 weeks ago, and he mastered pretty loud. I mean, it was a little bit quieter than I do, but it's definitely not like...
Sure, yeah. I mean, you would have thought by listening to these videos that it was in like a whole nother like galaxy, but that wasn't the case. It's just another case of like, I did the best work I could, but then it kind of got lost in translation when it went to somebody else who was a video guy, and but that's how it gets delivered to the public. So, and
that's the some of what I'm talking about. What we're losing control. If you're really not plugged into every little part of the process, that kind of stuff happens. You've got video guys who don't know anything about audio, and they've got the track turned down or something. I don't know what goes on. I don't know if they've got finalizer plugins on there. I've definitely had my fair share of work be represented in a weird way. I've had music videos that are in mono.
Oh yeah.
The mono upload.
I've gotten that a couple
worst.
times too.
Gosh.
I've gotten SoundClouds in mono too, or Bandcamp or something like that. But my next move was to email this guy who made the Let Live video and say, hey man, this sounds unbelievable. Can you give me like a crash course on how to make sure that this sounds good, so I can just like give this to other people, making videos of my masters. So that's going to be something that I'm going to kind of pay a little bit more attention to, see it through even after it leaves my hands to make sure that it sounds great.
Yeah. And in this generation that we're in now, where, video is so important to especially to the music world, but really to any business, what is it what is that? What is that trick? I mean, do you know the answer now? Did you find out? Okay,
no, he linked me to, he wrote me back, he linked me to an article. It was like a Apple Forum article that I haven't had a chance to read. And then he told me to give him a ring later on, which I plan to do. So I'll happily share that information with you guys. But maybe
we can follow up and put it on our website or something. And I do think that understanding this new process of consuming music and how you have to navigate it with your, with how you actually master stuff and how you mix things is so important, because it's not going to go anywhere. And the record sales these days are just so telling of how important streaming is going to be in the next few years.
And now you have to educate the client too about how to upload his files correctly so he doesn't screw
exactly.
Yeah. You have them uploading MP3s to sites that are going to re-encode it anyway, so you kind of have to just be, a master of all this delivery medium and use that to educate your clients, because ultimately they're going to be the ones doing the upload. It's kind of out of your hands at the very end.
All right, so we're going to switch gears here, talk a little bit about some gear, and then take some questions from the audience. First question I've got for you is, what is your favorite piece of processing gear in your arsenal? This has to be outboard.
Oh, okay. I'm staring at them right now. I think that my favorite piece is it's called a Hendy Amps Michelangelo, and it's made by this guy Chris Henderson in Texas, and he's crazy in the best possible way. He makes so many of these things, and I thought that he must have 3 or 4 people helping him out, but it's just him last I checked, and he just churns these things out. He also makes guitar amps that sound awesome, but it's basically a tube EQ, stereo tube EQ, ganged, so one set of controls, and it's got low, mid, high, and air, and that's it. It's got an aggression knob, which is kind of like a tube drive. And it's like the least clinical EQ I've ever heard in the analog domain. Like if you flip it in, it's, it'll boost certain frequencies, probably a dB, just by having it turned on. It makes if you ran a sweep through it, it would look like the ocean. It's not flat at all, but it sounds so good. There's just something about it, and I would say 99% of masters, even if I'm not EQing anything, I have it in the circuit just because it sounds so awesome.
That's sick. It's one of those pieces.
Yeah, it's one of those. To be honest with you, I try to make all of my analog gear those types of pieces, because to me, if they don't have that magic, then I shouldn't be using them. I should just be using a plugin. It's so much easier to recall and cleaner,
Absolutely. I mean, I do that all the time when I master songs too. Sometimes just running something through a good transformer or, a good op amp or something, it really just adds that certain amount of, sauce that you're just not going to get with a plugin.
Yeah. You've got that Shadow Hills compressor, right?
Yes, sir. I love that thing. And the 3 transformer options on it are really cool because you can use them tonally. If the mix is lacking bottom and it needs a little bit extra distortion, you can pop on steel. If you want it to glue more, you throw on iron. If you want an extended top, you can flip up to
nickel. Yeah, that's awesome.
So it's really good sounding piece of gear. Expensive, but I love it.
Sure. I've never used it, but I used to use their mic pre all the time, which also had the transformer options, and I thought that was very cool. And it just looks, I would probably pay the price for it just because of how awesome it looks, even if it didn't sound good.
Yeah, let's be honest. That's definitely a weighting factor. Like the first time I saw it, and I have like the all Class A one with the red lights, I'm like, that is like the most evil looking thing I've ever seen. I need to have it. It's a no-brainer. I'll sell my leg if I have to.
You might have to if they come out with another one. It's pretty much how much they cost.
So what do you do to get your signal so clean when you're outside of the digital realm? Is that something that you focus on? Is there a special cable, some kind of routing thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple things that I do that I think go against some conventional wisdom, but I've kind of read some articles and listened to some things, and it makes sense to me, for better or for worse. But, a lot of people will send out to their analog chain at, -18 or 0 VU. They'll kind of, because the old saying is that's what analog gear wants to hear, which is probably true. But in my head, if you're not sending out as close to 0 dB full scale on your converter, then you're not getting the full benefit of the dynamic range of that conversion stage. So what I do is I will normalize the unmastered tracks in my DAW to like -1 dB or -0.5. And then the first thing I'll do after they come out into the analog stage is passively attenuate them down to a level that my analog gear wants to hear, which can be a little bit louder if I want to drive it, or it can be softer if I want to clean. But the point is that I'm doing my digital to analog conversion using the full scale of the converter and getting the most headroom kind of out of it. And then I guess aside from that, I use all Mogami cables, which I feel are pretty quiet, but I never really had cable noise issues. I think the other part of it is just about gain staging. You know what I mean? If you have a super
definitely.
quiet signal and then you're cranking it up somewhere along the line, you're gonna get noise. But if you kind of keep that signal healthy throughout your chain, and it's nice if you can just bypass each piece of gear and kind of see where you're at without that gear changing the gain. If you keep everything in a good spot throughout your chain, and you have good gear, you should be in pretty good shape.
Now, what about electricity? Because I feel like this is often overlooked, and a lot of spots just don't have good electrical wiring, and there's all kinds of issues there. First of all, how seriously do you take that, and what are some of the challenges that you faced, and how did they get solved?
Well, fortunately, I've had problems with that in the past, and it certainly is the case. When you're dealing with such fractional adjustments and fading down to essentially the noise floor of your equipment, if you have electrical noise, you can hear it. I use these big monster power conditioners that have the noise filtering in them.
Yeah.
And that definitely seems to make a difference. I've never tried my current rig without it, but I do know that, especially when I was like tracking guitars or reamping, plugging into one of those versus plugging into the wall was night and day. It was like something would be unusable plugged into the wall, and then when I would plug into this, it was like dead quiet. So I kind of swear by these things and using them to kind of keep my gear quiet. Other than that, I'm fortunate that the space we're in is like an industrial building, and the power is probably overbuilt. And we had all the lines run, just for us, so they're all new and they're all clean.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's really important. Like when I did my studio build, it cost me to do one room. Well, I also had to upgrade the thing, but it was like $5,000 or $6,000 just to wire the room correctly and have it done in a way that it wasn't going to be an issue. And my power in this room is outstanding. That's great. So it's expensive, but you got to do it right.
Is your studio in your home?
No, I rent a commercial building like about a mile.
Oh,
from
cool. Yeah,
house.
I'm like 3 miles away from my house, but
you got it when you have kids.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. So when I was recording bands and I had bands, because I at one point had my studio where I lived, and my wife, who was then my girlfriend, was like, you know what, this is not working out. Like, you can't have bands in here all the time. And I agree. She was like, this is a little much. We live here. So I moved out and I got this space that we have now, but I was recording still. So now that I'm mastering, I really kind of need just this one room. So my dream is like to build a room in my house and just kind of walk around in my underwear all day because I don't have to leave home.
That's my reality.
Definitely.
So I can promise you that it's amazing.
I can't wait.
Okay, we're going to take a couple questions from the audience here, and once again, thanks for sharing your time and your words of wisdom with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Definitely.
So, let's see here. We've got a question from Lucas. He's asking, how do you approach EQ when you master?
I think that the best time to EQ a song is right after you hear it for the first time. I've kind of always thought that like the mastering engineer is the guy who gets paid to have the best knee-jerk reaction to anything he listens to. That's kind of what it is. It's like if you're sending your mix to a mastering engineer, it's usually because you're so inside it, you can't really step back and see the overall picture. So even as a mastering engineer, I think it's easy to get sucked in to the point where you don't really know what you're hearing anymore. And the best time for you to make that objective decision on how to EQ something is right when you hear it at first. So usually what I'll do is if I'm going to master, let's say I'm going to master a metal record, I'll find the best sounding metal record that I possibly can and listen to it for like 10 minutes before I even touch the stuff I'm mastering or listen to like a playlist of a couple songs that I think sound really great. Actually, occasionally I'll even listen to something that's completely different. Like yesterday I was mastering an acoustic record, and I was listening to like rock records as a reference, and I don't know why, it was just working for me. But I'll just get myself into a space where I'm listening to something that I think sounds really great and it's inspiring to me, and then boom, I flip over to what I'm working on. And as soon as I do that, it becomes very apparent what I have to do to EQ. You know, it's like, wow, this is too dark. Wow, this is too bright. Whereas if you just walk in the morning and put on the first thing that you're going to work on, you really don't always have as clear of a basis to judge it upon. So I think that that's my approach, is to just kind of do it, you know, get the overall EQ stuff out of the way as soon as I can while it's still fresh in my head, and then I kind of go back and do the fixing. You know, if there's like a resonance here, or if this is built up, that kind of stuff is more obvious. But I think that the overall balance of something is so much more apparent the second you flip it on.
Absolutely. This question comes from Giovanni. What's your favorite record that you didn't work on but you wanted to? And what pieces of gear do you prefer using, analog over digital? Can you describe your process when you start mastering something for the first time? I'd say, just to be short on time, because you did talk a little bit about analog and digital gear, let's answer the first one, which is, what is your favorite record that you didn't work on but wanted to? And the second part, which is, can you describe your process when you start mastering something for the first time?
Sure. My favorite record that I didn't work on, can it be a Beatles record or a radio or any Radiohead record?
It can be anything you want.
Yeah, I mean, if I could have worked on any record in the history of making records, it would probably be Radiohead's OK Computer, because I think that was such a revolutionary modern rock record in terms of the production that you could just have a business card that just says, Mike Kalajian, I worked on OK Computer. And that would be it. I mean, you wouldn't have, you know, so that's definitely it. And what was the second part again?
And can you describe your process when you actually start mastering something for the first time?
Sure. So like I said, I'll listen to a little bit of music and I'll put on the master, and usually I'll kind of just like hit broad stroke stuff. Like I'll listen to the first song, kind of do, you know, like I said, that Handy Amps EQ is kind of just 4 bands. I'll start adjusting that. I have another EQ called a NIF Soma, which is more of like a Soundtech kind of style in the way that it's laid out. It's like a parametric EQ. So I'll start kind of like tweaking the overall stuff and skipping kind of from song to song and making these like very broad adjustments from one song to another. Then it usually goes into problem solving, and for that I'll go back to the first song and I'll listen to it and I'll say, okay, is there anything wrong? And sometimes there's nothing wrong, and that's awesome. And then if there is something wrong, it's like, well, what is the most efficient way and the most simple way that I can fix this problem? And can I fix this problem in a way that makes it seem like it never existed? You know, there's always like, it's like if you have an SC vocal, you know, you can de-ess it, but can you de-ess it so it sounds like it was never SC and it doesn't have that like, slurry thing on the S's and, you know, stuff like that. Like, how efficiently can I do this and just make it disappear, you know, make these problems disappear?
I love that mentality. That's my approach kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if something has too much low end, I mean, you know, you can smash the low end and then it won't have a problem anymore, but it won't sound great. Can you do it in, you know, the most efficient way? Like, one of my favorite things to do is, like I said, if I'm de-essing something, and it's not necessarily a vocal, it could be a lead guitar. When this lead guitar comes in, it really just like takes my head off. Can I put the de-esser on in a way that it doesn't even do 1/10 of a decibel of reduction until that guitar part comes in? You know what I mean? That's kind of what I shoot for. I don't want to mess anything up. I just want to fix. And then after that, I mean, it's just more just listening and making these, you know, fine adjustments, you know, adding compression. I usually kind of add, if I'm going to do like any saturation or clipping, that kind of comes at the end. And then it's just kind of setting level. I mean, it's a gross simplification of the process, but that's essentially what it is.
Awesome. Let's just take one more here. By the way, Dan Corneff says you are pretty damn good.
And we love Dan, so
Dan Corneff is better than pretty damn good.
Yeah,
he sends me this stuff, and I'll send him a message. It's like, how does a guitar even sound like that? How do you do that? It's like amazing.
Danny Delta is asking, is the art of mastering dying? Budgets are lower than ever and falling. Bands make zero money from selling music. Why pay an extra guy to get 5% better product if in reality consumers don't really care about the loudness?
I would say to that, first off, I think it's a great mastering is much better than 5%. I think it's like a 20% improvement, maybe even more, depending on what you get. I think that if I got a 5% improvement on a thing that I was mastering, either I'm not having a good day or it's so good that that's all I want. The other thing is, I think that, and I kind of have two points on this, is that first off, I don't think that mastering has to be as expensive as a lot of people think it has to be. I think that unfortunately a lot of the really big mastering guys who are awesome and usually super nice guys, but I think that their whole setup was built on a different era in the music industry when there was a ton of money, and you have these huge elaborate setups and these big mastering houses in places like New York City that it just costs $100 for a soda. And I think that is what can't keep going, kind of that setup. But I think that something that I see more and more, and it's kind of what I have, is I still have the gear, but I don't have this gigantic elaborate place, so my overhead is a little bit lower, and I definitely pass that along to my clients. So I think that the whole thing, and I think that you guys see it too. I mean, it happens in recording studios. The Hit Factory closed, and all these big studios have closed, but people are still making great records, and they're probably making records that sound just as good. They're just not doing them in these gigantic, elaborate studios, and because of that, they can work with much better, or work much more affordably. That's the first
Absolutely.
part. The other thing is, I think that since more people are recording at home, it makes mastering even more important. And if you're going to record your own record, why not take the money that you're saving and invest in good mastering, because you may not have such an ideal listening environment, that you could really benefit much more than that 5% from a guy sitting down in a room that he really knows with speakers that sound really good and just kind of making the final call.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Yeah, Mike, you've been fascinating.
I had a blast. This is so much fun. It's cool too, because it's, I never really sat down and thought about how I felt about a lot of these things, so to talk about it is like pretty interesting. It's like, what's your approach? And I have to sit back and think like, well, wait a second, what is my approach? It's been so, it's like been instinctual up to this point. I just sit down and start twisting knobs, but it's kind of interesting to like have to vocalize it,
Absolutely.
It's a lot of fun.
I've definitely had that same journey, being interviewed so many times and having to tell my story. It's kind of, it's kind of cool to like go down memory lane.
Sure, you figure out what your story actually is. You're too busy living it to really. And yeah, this has been my actually my first podcast, so it's a blast.
Awesome. Well, if people want to check you out online, believe. Oh man, I lost your website. What is it?
It's rogueplanetmastering.com.
Yeah, check that out, guys. Check out his discography, and maybe we can have you on here in the near future.
Absolutely, anytime.
Thank you so much, and have a good one.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Take care.
The Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast is brought to you by Balaguer Guitars. Founded in 2014, Balaguer Guitars strives to bring modern aesthetics and options to vintage-inspired designs. Go to BalaguerGuitars.com for more info. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Fishman, Inspired Performance Technology. Fishman is dedicated to helping musicians of all styles achieve the truest sound possible, wherever and whenever they plug in. Go to Fishman.com for more info. To ask us questions, make suggestions, and interact, visit nailthemix.com/podcast and subscribe today.